Sorry, we're running a little late, but thank you all for joining us to this side event titled Legally Bold, Law and Governance for Ambitious Finance and NDCs. My name is Maeve McDermott, and I am one of the managers, along with Antoinette Nestor, of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. And this is my colleague, Ananya Chowdhury, who is coordinator of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce one of our chairs for the session, which is Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Segur, who's a world-leading jurist and scholar. She holds the chair in Sustainable Development Law and Policy at the University of Cambridge, where she's a senior law fellow at Lucy Cavendish College. She's also director of the Center for International Sustainable Development Law, executive secretary of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative for COP29, and International Law Association Vice President. With 26 books and 160 papers published in 5 languages, she edits a series of treaty-focused volumes for Cambridge University Press, serving on 5 law journals. She has been elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the country's highest academic honor, and holds the Wirramantry International Justice Awards, among other honors. And I'll turn over the floor to Ananya to now introduce our other chair.
It is my honor to introduce our other chair, Professor Alessandra Lehmann, who is the president of the Brazilian Bar Environmental Law Commission, Rio Grande do Sul State Chapter, and member of the Brazilian Bar Federal Climate Change Commission. She's also a distinguished professor of ESG and climate law. She's a board member of state and city climate and environmental councils in Brazil, serves on the IUCN World Environmental Law Commission and Climate Change Law Specialist Group, and contributes to the Global Perspectives on Corporate Climate Legal Tactics project. Without further ado, over to Professor Marie-Claire and Professor Lehmann. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you especially to those who have joined us at 6:30 on a Saturday evening. You must be truly interested in climate law and governance. Either that or, like me, you were just very impressed with our team's choice of a title. But I'm really, really pleased to have you here with us. And it's an honor and a pleasure to chair this extremely distinguished panel. As we know, we are not on track for 101.5 degrees. We are also seeing still the law being used as a very powerful tool for those who are not interested in keeping us on track. It is our responsibility as law and policy leaders to change course as fast as possible and to scale up as fast as possible the cohort of law and policy leaders worldwide ready to help us to change direction. So this event today will focus especially on the different ways of doing that and why. And I think in particular, what we are very, very pleased we can see is that we are joined by some truly remarkable leaders who can bring some very careful and inspiring insights to that transformation that is needed. We need, of course, to be able to harness law and governance for ambitious finance. And as the next round of nationally determined contributions to the global response to climate change under the Paris Agreement Articles 2, 3, and 4 move into their formulation and move into their progressively more ambitious adoption and implementation, we especially need to know that the law and governance community is going to be there playing the right role. And that is one of the very important points that we're going to be looking into today. So I will first turn to my co-chair, Professor Alessandra Lehmann, to say a few remarks, and then we have 2 very insightful partners who have kindly contributed a very brief video with their opening remarks for you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Cordonnier-Segur. In the interest of time, I will keep my welcoming remarks short, but I would like to join Marie-Claire in welcoming everyone to this official side event. And as we pave the way to COP30 in my home country of Brazil, I would like to say that this is an extremely aptly titled session. Being from the south of Brazil, from the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which was, as some of you might know, severely hit by unprecedented floods earlier this year. We do indeed need legally bold solutions. We need to truly harness the power of the law and policy to find innovative solutions to climate change. So I wanted to very briefly take this opportunity to say that the floods have affected over 90% of my state, an area equivalent to that of the UK. It has displaced almost 600,000 people, and it has caused 183 casualties. So I guess what I want to say is that even though we were in the middle of a cyclical event, which was El Nino, a World Weather Attribution report from the Imperial College London found that these particular events were made twice as likely by climate change. So as we pave the way from Baku to Belém, as we prepare for a new round of NDCs, so it's imperative that we link the general themes of today's session, that we link climate finance to NDCs and prepare to show an unprecedented level of ambition next year, as we do not want to live in a 2.8% hotter world. So thank you very much. Back to you, Marie-Claire.
Well, mine is purely an honor to introduce our first speakers in a brief video, which they have coordinated to do together. And in particular, of course, from our partner organizations, Advocate Omoyemen Lucia Odiji Emmanuel is a Nigerian lawyer, researcher, and educator specializing in human rights, climate change, gender mainstreaming, and property law. She lectures at the Nigerian Law School and is the founder of the Center for Human Rights and Climate Change Research in Nigeria. Her work focuses on addressing critical environmental and human rights issues, particularly through legal frameworks, and she's contributed to academic research, policy discussions, and many international events, as well as working with different advocacy groups in Nigeria. So it's an honor to have her together with our co-hosts, her Center for Human Rights and Climate Change Research in Nigeria, and the Green Mobilization Initiative. Joining us then also online with a video is Gabriel Opio Aborele, the founder and CEO of the Green Mobilization Initiative. It's an organization focused on environmental sustainability and community level law and policy in Nigeria. They're active in initiatives on the ground, advocacy for climate change mitigation, but also awareness campaigns and even direct actions such as tree planting. The organization, Green Mobilization Initiative, also collaborates with many different government entities at different levels, locally and nationally, such as the Parks and Recreation Department in Abuja, and works especially on education at the schools level. So one of their notable projects is Green Nigeria Schools Project, which works with young people all over the country in raising awareness about climate change in schools. And I can't think of two better people to take us from the human rights, national law changing work that is needed to the local outreach and work on the ground and governance and education work that is needed than Omoyemen and Gabrielle. So I wonder if we could cue their video and speech now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gabriel Aborele, founder, National Coordinator, Green Mobilization Initiative, an observer NGO based in Abuja, Nigeria. I would like to thank each and every one of us for being part of this side event, tagged Law and Governance for Ambitious Finance and NDCs. I also want to thank the lead NGO for their coordination. In this COP, I'm expecting that it will deliver on climate finance. We expect parties in the developed countries to adhere to the Paris Agreement to combat the effect of climate change. This is required so that countries, especially countries in the global south, will be able to implement their NDCs. Climate change is devastating our environment. Just recently in Borno, in Nigeria, that city had one of the worst floods in the history of that town. We lost over 150 lives and 419,000 people were displaced. They were displaced of their livelihoods, and in most cases, they are left with nothing. This is the more reason why, as civil society groups, we are clamoring for the operationalization of the loss and damage fund. Our communities, they need climate finance. They need climate finance. So this COP, we are hoping that it will be COP not just to come and talk and talk. We need action. We need action. And the livelihood of our people is being affected. People are displaced, loss of lives. I will implore every speaker tonight in this side event to come to terms with the urgency that is required in the delivery of Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
And Omoyemen as well.
International Research and Policy Advocacy at the Center for Human Rights and Climate Change Research. I'm also a law teacher. I welcome you to this side event titled Legally Bold, Law and Governance for Ambitious Finance and NDCs, hosted by Climate Law and Governance Initiative, Center for International Sustainable Development Law, Rio Grande do Sul State Chapter of the Brazilian Bar, the Center for Human Rights and Climate Change Research, and the Green Mobilization Initiative. Urgent climate finance is essential to meet the Paris Agreement goals and avoid climate catastrophe. It is essential at COP29 that a financial framework is agreed that will be able to support vulnerable countries. And this needs a sacrifice from the wealthier nations. Law and governance and human rights-based approach to climate financing is very, very essential to shape the responsibilities of climate finance and promote participation, address human rights and social inequalities, strengthen assessment frameworks, shape equality in assessing climate finance. Therefore, the key elements of the new collective quantified goals on climate finance should include human rights, climate justice, and gender equality. Also, human rights principles and standards should inform all action to address loss and damage. Legal boldness is needed to envision, drive, and sustain ambitious climate finance NDCs and ensure that loss and damage meets human rights prescriptions and obligations. This side event is expected to chart a course for legal boldness through its stimulating and very educative roundtables, discussions, and outcomes that will cover law and governance perspective for the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, law and governance for loss and damage intervention, and interactive sections to shape and strengthen our position. I thank you all for joining us at this side event. I wish you fruitful deliberations with intentional key messages that will shape and strengthen the outcomes of COP29. Thank you.
Excellent. Warmest of thanks to Gabrielle and to Omoyemen, both of whom are very deeply respected and honored advocates for stronger climate law and governance in their countries and indeed worldwide. And they have cause to be, as they've just explained. I will now pass the floor to my co-chair, who will introduce our first speakers. and give especially a warm welcome to them all.
Thank you very much, Marie-Claire. So our first roundtable for this session is titled "Advance the Collective Finance Goal for Climate Law and Governance." And by way of introduction to our climate finance roundtable, I would like perhaps to start on a more optimistic note and mention the fact that the IPCC AR6 found that there actually is enough global capital to close the climate investment gaps. So this is the good news. The bad news is that the IPCC AR6 also found that there are still institutional, market, and regulatory barriers to deploying global capital towards climate action and climate ambition. So on that note, I would like to present our first speaker for this evening, Advocate Michael Strauss, who is the General Counsel of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, and a laureate of the Climate Law and Governance Climate Global Leadership Award. Also a leading voice in international discussions on climate finance, and a member of the executive committee and crisis management team at EBRD. He has also represented the US on the board of the Asian Development Bank, building on key experience from his roles in the World Bank Group and the International Monetary Fund. Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So let's start with all of these NDCs. EBRD is, of course, one of the leading NDCs, and the NDCs came together at this to support the establishment of a robust and ambitious new collective quantified the NCQG. Our role involved as NDBs involves not only providing substantial funding, but also fostering transformative change to achieve the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. As we discussed yesterday, the general counsel several NDB community understands that achieving leveraging public and private funding to support sustainable. This goal is essential for enhancing accountability, increasing alignment with climate targets, and mobilizing both the public and private sectors. This week, the NDCs issued a joint statement outlining our collective 2030. We expect to contribute $100 billion annually for 42 billion allocated for adaptation. Additionally, we aim to mobilize $55 billion. The NDCs have already surpassed the 2025 projection that the 25% increase. So what about EBRD and how we mobilize the specifically to us, we're a bank and we have positioned ourselves in the past decade to become highly effective. In 2023, the bank provided $700 billion euros to mobilize at least $6.7 billion. So if you do the math, for every the higher all the entities are up the same. Our focus is solely on the financial volume. Here is committed to achieving the policy, legal, and governance. EBRD actually, in my department in particular, has what we call legal transition. Keywords extended beyond the five for policy makers, designing and implementing legal institutions. This is included energy market reform, for example, establishing regulations, unbundling integrated monopoly SPs, renewable energy illustrates how the bank invests and develops support policy agreement, implementing independent NDCs. The bank is currently looking at 18 industries. It's already ready to support options. Please be very active is also benefited. Just for the industry. Here, you find the biggest renewable energy solar power and those. Three options. In addition to the device, another reason that the great support is the North Macedonia country. This platform is the gateway for investment policy we also deploy 1.7 gigawatts of renewable energy. Greatest urban investments are creating Achieving these targets will require a substantial private sector investment in North Macedonia, estimated to be about 3 billion euros by 2030. But enough with the examples of our work. This is being called the Finance COP for a reason, and I want to take a moment to talk about how lawyers are collaborating with their finance sector counterparts to address the climate crisis. The financial and legal sectors are both pivotal to driving the global climate agenda. Professionals from both sectors will need to work in tandem to ensure smooth transitions to low carbon sustainable economies. Innovative legal drafting is essential for addressing the evolving risk allocation under contractual arrangements resulting from the impacts of climate change. For example, in the context of the EBRD's Corporate Climate Governance Facility, our lawyers draft and negotiate novel covenants for climate-related action in our transaction documents, ensuring a high level of client commitment and engagement. Another example is the launch of the climate-related debt clauses in our loan agreements with sovereign guaranteed and municipal clients from lower and lower middle income countries. What these will do is enable debt deferral on pre-agreed terms for 2 years after extreme climate events such as floods and droughts, giving clients some breathing space to compensate for the loss and damage that was suffered. Financial institutions as enablers of capital will play a critical role in accelerating the decarbonization of the real economy by developing innovative financial structures and products. Integrating climate-related considerations into investment and lending decisions will be a key challenge, and to do so, financial institutions would rely on the frameworks and policies that are developed by the legal community. So let me conclude and leave some time for everyone else by emphasizing that the MDBs, specifically EBRD, are committed to fostering systemic change to support the Paris Agreement's climate goals. By focusing on measurable outcomes, private sector engagement, policy and legal reform, and collaborative platforms, we're aiming to build a resilient, sustainable future. The path forward requires coordinated efforts, building partnerships, driving innovation, and committing to ambitious reforms and results. The EBRD and the larger MDB community stand ready to meet this challenge. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Michael, for your remarks. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Advocate Ayman Sherkawi, who is the director at the Hassan II International Center for Environmental Training and coordinator of the Mohammed VI Prize for Climate and Sustainable Development. Ayman is an esteemed legal professional. He also serves as lead counsel for climate change with the Center for International Sustainable Development Law, is one of the chairs of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative, and is deputy chair of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. Ayman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. First, looking at the title, which of this particular roundtable, I wanted to indicate that the collective finance goal indeed matters, but it is a collective quantified finance goal, and it's been at the core of many conversations here, and I think it's important not to lose sight of that. Beyond this particular precision, I wanted to start with a quote from Horatius, I think in English, if I'm not mistaken, and the quote goes as follows, quote, "Begin, be bold, and venture to be wise." End of quote. And clearly, climate change and climate action hasn't started yesterday. We began a while ago. Clearly, the time for boldness, therefore, has come, if you follow the logic of this particular quote. But I also want to talk a bit about venturing and wisdom, because I feel, and connecting also to one of the comments from the opening, where the speaker, one of the opening speakers was inviting us to come to terms with the urgency that is required. I believe that what we need is more venturing. And I mean beyond a business venture, as important as those are, venturing in the largest, most profound sense of the word. Earlier today, I was sitting in a panel, actually in an event, and there were two panels. The first panel, I was hearing, there is a lot of money, there are no bankable projects. In the second panel, I was hearing, there are plenty of great projects, banks make no efforts whatsoever. I think maybe, I'm not sure if I may be so bold to say that there's a bit of truth in both. And we may venture to bridge that gap and make sure that we reach what we need to reach and do what we need to do to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 agenda. And as I don't want to be too long, I will conclude on a football analogy. I was in a different panel earlier and I used a culinary analogy. So with your permission, I'll go more in the sports direction this time. So, and connecting to the new collective quantified finance goal. In football, knowing where the goal is great, but you need to get there and score. So yes, it's great that we can agree on a new collective quantified goal on climate finance, but very importantly, we need to score on that goal. And that, I believe, requires a lot of effort. At the same time, it's not just about scoring goals. It's also about making sure that goals are not scored against you. So you need to also make sure that you defend at the same time. And the connection I want to make there with law in general and governance is, to a large extent, I'm assuming, even yourself, but when I started thinking of this analogy minutes ago, I was thinking that law would be in the role of a referee, because that's how we see law, as a referee. But then I changed my mind about 30 seconds ago. And I think that law can go beyond that and should go beyond that. Law has a role to play in helping to score the goals that we need to score to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Sorry, I keep using goals a lot, and the 2030 agenda, but also in making sure that we don't score goals against ourselves. And I rest here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Thank you for the football analogy. As a Brazilian, that actually definitely resonates. But also, without further ado, I would like to give the floor and introduce Dr. Marcus Gehring, who is an associate professor of law, former director of the Center for European Legal Studies, a fellow and director of Director of Studies in Law at Hughes, and a fellow of the Lauterpacht Center for International Law. Professor Gehring is a distinguished legal scholar. He has been a visiting professor in several law faculties around the world and held a Jean Monnet research chair at Personam in Sustainable Development Law at the University of Ottawa Law Faculty in Canada. He serves as lead counsel for sustainable trade, investment, and finance law with the Center of International Sustainable Development Law. Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. And at the risk of scoring an own goal, and as someone from Germany, of course, I can't resist the many football analogies. Of course, you shouldn't exchange the shirts of your team before the match has actually begun, right? So, and sometimes I look at the COP processes and I can't avoid thinking people are actually switching their jerseys a little bit too early. But be that as it may, I wanted to share some of the insights we've gained over the years, because in our view, we need to link what happens here with the rest of the world. So we don't need more lawyers just working on climate law. We need to mainstream climate law into all areas of law, especially tax law, construction law, transport law. Even a friend of mine works in the leisure law practice. And so the more we insulate it, the more we're siloed, the less we're actually achieving the objectives of the Paris Agreement. The area that I work in, and we had 4 panels yesterday at the Climate Law and Governance Day on trade, investment, and finance, right? So international trade law, international investment law, and international financial law has so many connections with the climate negotiations, with the climate agenda. And this is the year when every country is thinking about how to update their NDCs. And what we're arguing for in the research we've done is to use the NDCs as an opportunity to connect more sectors of your economy, more areas of law to the climate change objective, right? So highlight some of the NDC objectives and highlight the connections that might have to your financial obligations, to your trade obligations, to your investment obligations. An integrated approach can actually help us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to achieve the Paris Agreement targets. So what we've done is we analyzed the most recent series of free trade agreements and those clauses that actually give you a direct linkage with your NDCs, and not just as an exception, not just as a shield to potential investment or trade claims, but rather as a proactive further liberalization in areas that really support the achievement of the NDCs, that really support the long-term financial goals. Unless we manage that type of legal integration, we will not achieve our objectives. Climate law will become a kind of spaceship that hovers around the world and never connects with the national and the local level. And we need to avoid that under all circumstances. So our recommendation is, if you are asked to sign a new trade agreement, it needs to link to the NDCs. It needs to integrate some of your own priorities. If you want to electrify your transportation sector, that needs to be integrated into your financial commitments, into your trade commitments, into all areas of international action and international coordination that you're interested in. And you need to be, as the session of says today, you need to be legally bold, right? Don't rely on your trading partner to do the right thing. Insist that, if you've signed the Samoa agreement, make sure that the European Union actually lives up to the financial commitments under the Paris Agreement, and write that into your trade agreements, write that into your investment commitments, write that into your loan agreements, dare I say, with multilateral development banks. And write that into your closing sentence. I'd just like to highlight that you can find all the research on the CISTL website, on our social media feeds of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for highlighting the transversality of climate law. I think this is always refreshing. I'm not going to go into details, but I do want to say that I think it's detrimental if we consider climate law as a mere subdomain or subset of environmental law. I'm not going to go into details, but I think this is really refreshing to hear. And we do have a couple of minutes as Dr. Jean-Yves Remy will not be able to join us in person today. So perhaps we have time for one round of questions, which I would then ask our panelists to answer in no more than 1 minute. So, oh yes, are we gonna take questions from the audience now? Okay. Yeah, please.
I think it's wonderful to listen to the football analogy because I'm a football fan, but my name is Subarna Barwa, I'm from Bangladesh. So on this stage, I see the global north. I am from the global south. But I have 3 specific questions because I follow the CCSI of the Columbia University on investment law and all these research they do. The first thing is on the legal implications. For example, when you try to go into any agreement with DCF or other funding bodies, we recently see that they are introducing more de-risking arrangements for the investors, the private investors. But we advocate also to consider de-risking mechanisms for the recipients of the loans, because if the contractual agreements are not there, currently we're experiencing 2 sorts of problems. One is most of the DCF or multilateral fundings, they prefer subnational entities. And when you see that a subnational entity is failing to repay, the ultimate burden is going to the government, and we don't want that. So I don't know how actually it's to be mitigated. So this is what probably there is a legal implication that the lawyers has to really has an area to contribute. The second part is on the ESG emissions, because if you cannot really make the farms greener, households greener, you cannot really implement NDC. It's all surface level talks we're doing. So if the farms need to be greener, ESG still is voluntary. And why it is still voluntary and how it may be, that's also a concern. Probably I would like to hear from you. And so thank you very much for the questions.
Thank you.
2 questions. Yep.
Question
here.
Hi, my name is Enrique Franca. I'm a business lawyer from Brazil. I'm a practitioner. I came from finance. I used to be a Wall Street lawyer. I used to work for Chase, JP Morgan, at Paul Weiss in New York. So I've been in finance for the last 25, 30 years. I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm a partner of Jundu Climate. We've been trading different specific climate agreement for the last 10 years. I'm very much concerned about the issues that we may suffer between inequalities from the different jurisdictions, and specifically regarding some instruments that may suffer with some differences in our jurisdictions, and specifically about the differences in our jurisdictions, specific for in Brazil. We just approved from a Senate yesterday the last piece of law that we hope to expect not to have any changes in the lower chamber, but regarding carbon credits, we are almost there to settle our jurisdiction into our specific law. So my question to you is, we should have an harmonization on carbon credits markets. And so what's your expectation on this possible harmonization on the future?
Wonderful. Thank you for your questions. I think Marcus would like to take the first one.
Give you 1 minute each to.
1 minute. Oh, of course. 1 minute each to answer
Second.
whatever.
I prefer the second.
Yeah, you can do the second one. That's perfect.
Yes, thank you very much, Enrique, for that fantastic question. Our former colleague, Richard Tersovsky, once said that it would be easier to create a world currency rather than a world carbon credit system. On the other hand, we've heard the Director General of the WTO calling for a global coordination of these instruments. And I think they could be linked, they could be made much more transparent so that more countries could participate. Legally, that's very complicated. The linking clause, even by the EU, was only attempted once with regards to New Zealand, and then the New Zealand government changed its mind. So it is legally very complicated. On the other hand, I think with the Article 6.4, we now have the legal basis to actually create something of a global carbon market. And that, I think, will really change the parameters of that particular exercise.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, and just to add a bit of context on my fellow Brazilian question, the piece of legislation referred to is we're as close as ever to a regulated carbon market, cap and trade market in Brazil. So, perhaps Eamon would like to add the considerations.
Oh, very briefly on the ESG element, I used in a previous life to be the director of the Global Compact in Morocco. I mean, there are many ways of looking at them, and if they are voluntary in some cases because interests wanted them to be voluntary, but they are not always voluntary. You have mandatory ESG laws. You have, for example, the UK has a couple of them. In Morocco, for access to capital markets, you also have since 2022 or 2023, I can't quite recall, but again, mandatory ESG disclosure. And within 1 year, we had a compliance rate of about 97%. So there's a trend there. And I find that we're going towards more and more regulation. But what I've been hearing from folks that are not quite convinced by that is that it is discouraging engagement from some stakeholders when you turn it more mandatory, because they want to feel like it's their choice. But at some point, they get to choose perhaps a bit too much. So narrowing somewhat and making sure there's some manner of aggregation and follow through and follow up and verification is also helpful. So I hope that, thank you.
And maybe on your first question about de-risking, which I think is a really good one, to the extent I heard it, I had a little trouble hearing you up here, but it goes back to something that Ayman said actually before, which is, do we have a problem in finance or do we have a problem in bankable projects? I think both are arguably true, but more bankable projects. How are we going to get to that place? Well, one of the only ways to do that is to look at the difference between what is economically beneficial and what is financially viable. And the difference is the de-risking that you put your finger on. But you have to be one has to be incredibly careful to de-risk the right projects if you're going down that path. Something I could talk about for hours, but won't. But you pointed to the point about the question about how does this affect the recipients, the people on the other end. There should be no risk. There, I think I 100% agree with what I think was implied in your question. And the way we de-risk at institutions like EBRD is to ensure that our policies are 100% complied with, because they are the absolute gold standard, particularly environmental and social policies. In fact, we just finished revising our environmental and social policy to be even more stringent than it already very much was. But nobody's perfect, and we have systems for accountability in those scenarios that I very much, as the General Counsel, hope will work.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks to the audience for the questions and your interest and participation. And before we wrap up and move on to our second roundtable on NDCs, I would like to thank our panelists for their fantastic insights. And I will turn it. I will give the floor to my co-chair, Marie-Claire.
Excellent. Our second panel is going to look specifically at, with all that ambitious finance that we've been legally bold to pull together, we need to also talk especially about raising NDC ambition and addressing loss and damage. So I can't think of better people to join us on the panel as I introduce them than our speakers for the second roundtable, especially, of course, Advocate Hafiz Islam Khan, if you could come up, a leading environmental lawyer with 15 years of experience in climate law and policy, focusing on natural resources management and climate change, executive director of the Center Come Together of Climate Justice in Bangladesh, teaching environmental law at North-South University, an independent university in Bangladesh, core member of the team of least developed country negotiators since actually it was 2011 that we met, wasn't it? When it was your first time. And affiliated with the International Center on Climate Change and Development, ECAD, as well as IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, with LLM degrees from University of Dhaka and Central European University. Together with him has come up, if I understand correctly, Dr. Wakeda Davidson-Ere. Yes, excellent. Who serves as Director of Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment in Bayelsa State. Bayelsa State. I was practicing this morning. Nigeria. Directly involved in initiatives to combat climate change and promote sustainable development in practice, especially, and instrumental in advocating for stakeholder engagement in climate action, emphasizing collaboration for shared goals, which is very, very valuable.
That narrative has changed a little. I moved to the Minister of Marine and Economy.
I see. Well, you've certainly obtained a reputation for being someone who's good at engaging stakeholders. And in a governance panel, we value that and we honor it and we appreciate it. I will also, of course, introduce, I understand, have joined me on the other side, Dr. Wakede Davidson-Ere. Nope, I've just gone sideways here. Dr. Godwin Uyi Ojo, sorry. A prominent environmental advocate and executive director of Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria, who focuses on environmental justice, works extensively on issues related to oil pollution and climate change and renewable energy, and is, of course, especially emphasizing the importance of moving away from fossil fuels to renewables. So an excellent person to talk to us about ambitious NDCs. And of course, we are very, very pleased and honored to have a closing keynote who has joined us as well, who also has a beautiful idea of color, which, as you know, I mean it when I say that I appreciate that. And of course, Dr. Kiruka Maduekwe. Have I tried my best? Thank you. Director General of Nigeria's National Council on Climate Change. And she is, of course, as well, an extremely experienced and distinguished climate policy and project implementation expert, contributing significantly to Nigeria's environmental strategies. She has a very impressive educational background, and her research has focused, especially in her PhD, on sustainable practice in Nigeria's extractive industries. She was previously the national coordinator for the Climate Parliament, promoting renewable energy and sustainable solutions globally. So I think we are joined certainly by some absolutely brilliant voices. Our colleague earlier mentioned being there to listen to the different regions of the world, the different voices. And I think we're certainly very, very welcoming of those voices on this second roundtable. I'm going to turn first to Dr. Godwin, if he wouldn't mind just giving us 3 or 4 minutes of remarks, which we then allow time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Where the first panel started with a kind of football analogy. So Nigeria is also a football nation. And,
So how do we find out? What am I going to do?
And the first point I want to make is that in these negotiations, when we talk about finance, we should not shift the goalpost of finance all the time. Before the match, during the match, and after the match, the goalpost for finance is changing very rapidly. And that itself is a cause for concern. I want to really pose some questions for us to also look at in terms of how we can move forward with issues of loss and damage and how the laws can help us. Talking about shifting of the goalpost, we've heard of the Paris Agreement, and then the promises of $100 billion per year, which is fading fast into the distance. Nobody is talking about that anymore. We're talking about new ambitions. Of course, I have always advocated that the Global South, the creditor, have failed to hold the debtors from the Global North into account. That has been my position. And then to look at it from another perspective, do we really understand? We need to question ourselves whether there is this sense of urgency to act on climate impacts, climate action. Is there really a sense of urgency? Do we understand that? Do we know that it will impact the whole world and many people will die? The opening statement from Gabriel indicated how many people died in Nigeria, and the same is all over the regions. So the second point is, when we talk about laws, I think the focus is trying to shift this whole idea of cap in hand, asking for favor, trying to shift it into a human rights perspective, and to say that what we are discussing about is a right, it's an obligation. So I think there was no law binding the Global South to deliver on the 100 billion. So whatever ambition we are calling for here, if we don't also if we are not able to achieve a legal binding mechanism, we might just amount to shifting the goalpost all the time. For example, another example I want to give, Nigeria has pledged, like many countries, pledged to reduce its NDCs by 20% unconditionally and 47% given international effort. But like many other countries, especially in Europe, given the war that is going on and all those kind of narratives, how do you call for ambition on NDCs when you are busy exploiting, exploring, looking for more oil and gas? How can that really work? Ambition, cut ambition, reduce your carbon footprint. At the same time, you are investing money and putting much money into this issue. So I think we need to clarify that kind of conundrum that we find ourselves. And lastly, transnational corporations, there has been a global effort to put in place a global court of law to hold corporations and government accountable for human rights violations relating to environmental justice, climate justice. So these two critical elements, lastly, I think is very crucial for us to hold corporations accountable. Remember, corporations are not accountable to any given country or structures simply because they wield more political and economic power over nation states. But when we look at it collectively and see how we can bring about a legal global mechanism a legal system that can bring these peculiar, different climate change issues in a global law court, then we think we can move forward on a higher level. Thank you.
Dr. Godwin, thank you. Very, very wise words. And deeply appreciated. A challenge indeed that all of us need to treat. Climate law, the need to be legally bold with a much greater urgency. And you have given us many good thoughts to pursue. I will turn now to Dr. Wakete, and we would welcome your thoughts about the law and the governance that is needed if we are to be truly bold. Oh.
Okay, thank you. As an African nation and a subnational entity, Bayelsa State, one of the things we'll find is the need to raise ambition with respect to data and research. And most times, even as a nation, Nigeria is still struggling to migrate to tier 2 reportage on greenhouse gas emissions inventorization. So we need to increase ambition to funding data, funding research needs and all that. But specifically, there are scenarios on ground in doing law on legal issues. We see that our legal frameworks are quite weak and does not really speak to the needs of climate governance. Why I'm saying this is because we have loopholes in terms of our forest governance, loopholes in terms of maritime industry, in several sectors of our government. We see that there is need to strengthen law and governance in order to improve our engagement processes. In Bayelsa State, it is very frequent to see coastal erosion, sea level rise, and all these kind of climate-induced impacts in the state. And raising NDC ambition can help implement stronger adaptation measures to protect these incidences, and then also to build economic resilience. Oftentimes you see farmers having to harvest crops before the season comes to an end. And because of impact of flooding and sea level rise and all that, and livelihood losses and all that. And in all these scenarios, you discover that the ordinary people are the most impacted. And if we have to, get it right, then compellingly, we have to raise ambitions. And also, at the level of governance, we discover that our governments may not have the kind of understanding that we would have needed. And so we also need another layer of raising ambition in terms of engaging governments at the highest level to the subnational level. There are things that even up to this moment, subnational governments will not want to do in terms of climate change. And so I think we need to raise ambition in terms of how to engage from the federal government to the subnational entities so that they will understand the issue we are discussing about. When you ask some persons, do you understand climate change? And they will say, climate change. Yes, I understand climate change. Yes, I can't catch fish anymore. They have different answers and different perspectives, But then when you get to sometimes government, so the community people understand because they bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change. But when you get to government circles and you ask them, what is climate change? You have some problems, even at the government circles. And so we need to engage government at all levels for them to understand so that they will come up with the right policies and programs, within their subnational space. So there are a lot of these reasons why we need to raise ambition. And also to ensure transparency and accountability. We need to raise ambition by establishing robust monitoring and reporting systems to track progress and ensure accountability. We do this, of course, it can help to build trust and encourage continuous improvement in climate actions. And also in Bayelsa State, we can say that integrating blue economy principles into NDCs can promote sustainable use of marine resources, and to support economic growth. And this includes sustainable fishing, eco-friendly tourism, and renewable energy projects and others. So there are a lot of reasons why we need to scale up ambition. We need to speak to our institutions of higher learning and to improve research in these areas we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And very, very pertinent points. What you're saying especially, and I've seen this so many times worldwide, they ask us at these institutions of higher learning, you can't really define sustainable development. Tell me the one thing that makes development sustainable globally. Well, it means that that man who cannot find the fish anymore can actually find the fish. And of course, that's going to make a difference in a different country where it's somebody who needs to learn from and live from the forest if the forest is burning. Sustainable development has to take into account the local reality, the subnational reality, the national reality, and it has to be an answer for, an aspiration for the people who live there and the community they want to build and where they want to go. And if we criticize each other in those institutions of higher learning and say, oh, you don't have one definition, therefore it's meaningless, we're missing the point that you have made very, very clearly. Thank you. In exactly what you say, the transparency and also the capacity. And you're right, we do need to step up. Speaking of stepping up from local, where he's a barefoot lawyer working with communities affected by climate change, to the global, where he's fighting for a response fund on loss and damage. We are very honored to be joined by Advocate Hafiz Khan to give us 3 minutes, 4 minutes of his thoughts. And I'm right next to you, Hafiz.
Thank you, Professor Marie Clara and colleagues and friends. So we heard about the NDCs. So let me start with saying that mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage is a continuum. Mitigation and adaptation that can reduce the potential risk of the loss and damage. So if you look at the current NDCs, that is very frustrating. At the same time, the NDCs that came up from the LDCs particularly, to implement those NDCs, we need particularly financial and technical support. For example, Bangladesh, we committed 5% for voluntary contribution and 15% subject to finance and technology. So to implement the NDC, we need financial and also technical support. But support is really not available. So this is a finance COP. We are talking of the goal, new and collective quantified goal, but not in terms of the quantity. Quality is very important. We can agree here $1 trillion goal. We agreed 100 billion goal earlier, but we didn't deliver it. So we need to develop a delivery mechanism. What my colleagues said, reporting and transparency is very important. At the same time, we need to make the access model easier so that we can access it. You all know that loss and damage fund is there. Now, what is the access model it is? We agreed for a very innovative approach that is trigger based, that is soon after an event, vulnerable communities needs to access this fund soon after an event. Then what would be the innovative mechanism to support the vulnerable communities like soon after a flood or cyclone? Second, the programmatic approach. Vulnerable countries, they need to develop short-term, long-term, mid-term programs. But unfortunately, we don't have capacities to develop those sort of programs, particularly in terms of addressing the slow onset processes like sea level rise or desertification. So we need technical support, not only financial support, technical support, also capacity building. Vulnerable communities, they know the best ways how to deal with their vulnerable ecosystems. For me, that is, we need to involve the communities in the decision-making process. We need to involve the communities in the implementation processes. We need to build up the capacity of the communities. Now, in terms of legal reform, we need to support the vulnerable states so that they can take innovative legal and institutional structure so that they can access the finance, they can access the technology, also policy guidance from the global level that we structured by last 30 years. This is the time to take the bottom-up approach. Last 30 years, we have taken the top-down approach. We are negotiating last 30 years. I think that is good enough. Now we need to understand the community needs. We need to understand the needs for the ecosystems so that based on the needs, we need to develop our further policies. I would like to stop here. Thanks again, Mary Claire.
Excellent. Thank you. I think that's the shortest Hafiz has ever been. I think this is going to mean we're going to have to do a lot more cooperation with you because we have clearly so far further to go together. I would like to pause briefly and take a couple of questions from the audience again, as we did before, and then we have closing keynote speaker, who we are very honored to invite, as well as a brief presentation of the outcomes of Climate Law and Governance Day. And I would like to say a special thanks to all of you who are online. I have received the news that there are hundreds watching us, and I'd like to welcome you and recognize also that, of course, in Climate Law and Governance Day with 3,400 registrants that was yesterday and many panels and online engagement opportunities, we know that many of you have then come to hear the report back to the COP from the flavor of the conversations, the legally bold flavor of those conversations. And we're very, very honored that you are here with us to do that. So I will turn to the group that is here, the brave souls who have stayed and are here at nearly 8 p.m. on a Saturday in the COP. And if there are maybe just two questions that will allow a 1-minute response. I will allow Professor Gehring to make one of the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm wondering whether you're watching the sort of international advisory opinions and whether you as government lawyers are advising your governments to take some of the findings of these advisory opinions into account in the reformulation of the NDCs.
Okay. Thank you. So do the international courts and tribunal decisions really matter to the governments when they're making the NDCs? That's an interesting one. And do we have one more? If not, I'm going to abuse my position as chair and actually ask. In particular, what I would love to know, and the discussions that we've been having at the Climate Law and Governance Day, is that in the work you do on the ground, all of you that you are doing on the ground, there are people who are already suffering from the impacts of climate change that are, as you say, losing their lives, their families, their livelihoods, being displaced. What do you think would be the breaking point? I mean, are we there already and we just aren't aware? I have a colleague who is working on Constitution for the Cataclysm as his new book. He's a legal philosopher. And he's trying to understand, how do people govern themselves when it's too much? And I would wonder if you could tell us, do you think we're already at that breaking point? Do you think, how much more can people take, the ones that you're working with? And if so, what can we tell them when we go back to our countries if this COP doesn't succeed? So I will turn to our colleagues and do it the same way we did last time, where the last is first and the first is last. And Hafiz, 1-minute answer to those two questions.
Okay, I will take only 30 seconds to respond Marcus' question. Very important. Marcus, but we are waiting for the ICJ advisory opinion, right? Maybe the next year. On 2nd December, Bangladesh is going to give the oral submission. Our current environment minister, you know that she's also environment minister. Maybe she's also joining the oral submission. But my concern is that we adopted United Nations Convention Framework in 1992. Didn't we recognize the state responsibility in terms of historical responsibility? So why we need to get the only advisory opinion again from the International Court of Justice? Anyway, that might be useful, but I don't know how far. You see tonight, COP is very slow. It's finance COP. I can tell you, this COP is very slow. Thank you so much.
I think the opinion counts. It's important in putting some sort of subtle pressure on nation states and governments like governments of Nigeria, and also, but I think it is also important that governments are advised to scale down these laws and policies to the subnational level to have the needed impact, the desired impact. And for us as subnational entities, I know Nigeria has a kind of data law and all that, but it's not enforced. And so some kind of more engagement is important for them to be able to scale this down to the subnational entity. So it is important.
Very good point as well. And indeed, we've been impressed with the engagement, especially across Nigeria, in our courses that we offer online from the subnational groups. And we understand that that is necessary and we should be doing more of it. One last word.
Okay. I think the communities themselves are smarting up with support from civil society and groups working with fence-line communities. There's rising issues of climate court cases, not just in Nigeria, but across the globe, in every region. Some are asking for just compensation, asking for cleanup. Others are asking for real climate change issues. And these are very important. Take, for instance, Shell in 2015, 2016, paid 55 million pounds, about $83 million, to the Bodo community for the impact of their activities against the Bodo community in Ogoniland. So these court cases will continue. And as you said, I think government is jittery, corporations are jittery, and they are beginning to try to listen, but not just to provide answers, but they are going to the approach of greenwashing and de-risking, which does not help. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to call up, before our closing keynote, Dr. Antoinette Nestor, CLGI manager, affiliated lecturer at University of Cambridge, and of course, a city councillor in her own right at the local level, together with advocate Tejas Rao, the senior manager of the CISDL, and Ananya Chowdhury, the CLGI coordinator, to give a 3-minute presentation of the results of Climate Law and Governance Day. And as they are coming up, I will turn to my co-chair, who has just seen exactly what our colleagues from Nigeria mentioned in Brazil and want to make a last closing point.
Yes, I just wanted to circle back to what I said at the very beginning, and I would like to highlight the importance of oral history. Because what we saw in my region is when people well into their 80s and 90s, when they say it's unprecedented, people listen. So this is to tell whether we are at a breaking point or not, that's the oral history is really important.
Thank you. And please, especially for our audience online who are on a very different time zone than we are, I think in many cases, we would love to hear a brief report on climate law and governance.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. And since we're continuing with the theme of football, it seems, I would say that you always need to be prepared. And education and capacity is key in this round if you really basically want to actually score goals. So there you have the pant around football for any football lovers out there. So,
You're sounding like a football mum.
So we had 3,400 registrants from 113 countries online, with 269 individuals from Kenya, 212 from Nigeria, 197 from the UK, and 130 from India, and 121 from the US. So at the moment, Kenya is actually on top of the scoring system here. We also had 3 high-level plenaries on climate compliance on trial, creating systemic impact for Paris alignment and the green transition, and breaking the oil spill through law. We also had 13 engaging experts roundtables and legal sessions. And more importantly, we have a renewed commitment to provide more online sustainable development law and policy scholars for over 16,000 learners from 160 countries by the next Global Stocks Day. So I would say, please keep watching the news and keep a tab on the scores. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. Taking over from there, what we realized during COP26 in Glasgow in 2021 was that there was a capacity chasm. So essentially, implementing the Paris Agreement and advancing Sustainable Development Goals required scaled up finance and robust domestic laws and institutions, as this panel and this side event has been saying over and over. And that's where the Climate Law and Governance Capacity Registry was born. So born from a pledge during COP26 in Glasgow in 2021 to increase the climate law and governance capacity worldwide tenfold from 600 to 6,000 legal specialists by COP29 came the registry. And we are delighted to announce that we have reached over 6,000 registrants for the registry. Essentially, by agreeing to become a registrant, you agree to increase legal and institutional responses to the challenges posed by climate change, to support and promote the implementation of the Paris Agreement and any associated international climate change instruments, including domestic mitigation, adaptation and resilience, and finance measures, and advance the global response to the threat of climate change in the context of sustainable development, including the Sustainable Development Goals and any associated instruments over time. However, this is not the end. Increasing climate law and governance capacity is a constant endeavor. And by joining the registry, which you can still do, you will then further receive curated newsletters, emails about developments and other events about climate law and governance, and a community which can enhance and support one another and increase global climate law and governance capacity. Thank you very much.
We're also very happy to share with you a warm invitation to join us for the 2024 Climate Law and Governance Specialization course taking place tomorrow in partnership with the ADA School of Law. We already have 1,100 registrants from 100 plus countries in person and online, and we're delighted to especially speak to you about the local legacy of the specialization course, with 150 plus participants joining us already in person, including from Azerbaijan and the Caspian region more broadly. The course itself is a unique half-day course with an agreed principles and methodology, drawing entirely from multilaterally negotiated text, and lectures by leading global professors and experts, including some who are in the room with us here today, reporting on developments that have taken place in week 1 in the Blue Zone. We then have breakout sessions to encourage peer learning and country experiences, with networks really forming on the day itself. And of course, as announced by Ananya, we have an invitation to join the Climate Law Capacity Registry as a climate law specialist at the end, with a certification that's offered. As you can see, we have several students who are in Dubai with us in the pictures over here. So please do join us tomorrow. There is still an opportunity to register. We'd love to see many of you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you especially to Antoinette, to Ananya, to Tejas, and to Maeve, who helped open the event, and a really, truly terrific team that have put so much work into making this possible. Scaling from 600 to 6,000 in 3 years is remarkable achievement. And we're very, very happy to be able to announce and celebrate it tonight. And in that spirit of celebration, I am deeply honored to invite our closing keynote speaker to the podium, of course. She is the Director General of Nigeria's National Council on Climate Change. So I can't think of anyone better to talk to us about, especially the climate law and governance. How can we be legally bold?
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try and keep it short because I know we're tired and hungry and want to sleep. But actually, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me here. As a human rights lawyer, um, I'm privileged to be part of this conversation, and so thank you again. For us as a country in Nigeria, we're currently again in the process of reviewing our NDCs. And one of the things we are being asked, and we're also being taxed here in COP, is how do you have a more ambitious NDC? And the question we ask is, how do we get more ambitious funding to encourage us to move from point A to point Z? What are we saying? We're talking about increasing finance for adaptation projects. As a country with low adaptive capacity, we are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, not because we are the highest emitters, especially Africa, but because of where we are located geographically. And again, because we already had existing vulnerabilities. I'm happy to have, you know, Mr. Godwin here, who is also in the fight for climate change and environmental protection in these countries that have already had years and years of their environmental degradation and pollution. And so by the time you have flooding, by the time you have droughts, by the time you have desertification, by the time you have all these impacts, rise in high temperature coming, that further intensifies and exacerbates the already existing vulnerabilities. So the question for us is, what do we need to do? What are the steps we need to take? Very clear coming to COP is finalizing the conversation on Article 6, and that's one of the take home we hope we do take. And then also ensuring that there's a clear demarcation between the definition of what finance is, that development finance is not called climate finance or climate finance called development finance. So it's very important that these conversations are out there. And very important as well is as countries, because one of the things we've seen in Nigeria is having a legal framework that guides our climate change, mainstreaming climate change in all the ministries, departments, agencies, private sector, and individuals as well, is having that climate change legislation. Very important. What that climate change legislation has done for us as a country is creating the National Council on Climate Change, which I do head with the honor of heading that. But very important, again, as a human rights lawyer, it's that for the very first time in our history, Nigeria is known to have myriad of legislation with regards to environmental pollution and protection. Is for the very first time, we have a section in a law, in a substantive law, that provides for us to use true human rights approach to ensure that individuals, entities are held accountable for not being able to hold up to the climate obligations. I know I'm government, but this is what I actually tell civil society. I say, hold us accountable. You have the tools, engage, and ensure that you start engaging, because before then, the question was there wasn't any legal framework. There wasn't any anything to hold anybody. But now there is that section in the section 34 of the Climate Change Act that says anyone. And for us, that is a huge milestone, because again, the law before was locus standi, meaning you do not have the right to come before the court to be able to hold the companies or anybody accountable. But now the law says anyone, and anyone means anyone, can go before the courts in Nigeria and say that a company, the public, or an individual is not is not meeting up to the climate obligations of the country. I'm really looking forward to those engagements, sincerely, because like I say, you can only have changes when you have jurisprudence, and jurisprudence comes at the law court, and that is the power the civil society has. So what am I saying basically? I know I said I'm not going to keep us long. I remember that. Exactly. You can't talk about an ambitious NDC without talking about finance. You can't talk about loss and damage without talking about finance. And very important is also having baseline studies. Very critical. What do you have exactly as a country? What are the issues you have? So you have to have, of course, have done your vulnerability assessment. We are a federal country. I mean, federal means we have national and then we have 36 states where these issues do happen. How do we get money to be able to carry out those assessments? Of course, one of the things that I hear very clearly is capacity building, because you also have to build the capacity of these people who will be able to monitor, verify, and report as well. So these are very critical issues. And this is where I'm hoping that we'll be able to get finance, not loan, of course, I know not loan, but how do we ensure that these issues are rightly tackled? Because loss and damage is a very important conversation that we're having as Africa, as Nigeria. We do not, well, the argument is our emissions are very low, but be that as it may, what can we do differently? And of course, I can say that we're not sleeping, we're not holding our hands, and we're not sitting on our hands. We're actively taking steps to ensure that we address these issues. For instance, in our NDC, 2021 NDC, we added methane. And to ensure that we're driving that conversation of methane, I'm the global methane champion, I have the honor to be that, is that Nigeria has regulations that actually address and penalize methane as well. So, and we've also identified sectors for that: agriculture, water, agriculture, waste and oil and gas. And very clear, I know I'm maybe talking like a broken record, is finance, finance, finance. And that's what we want to take away from this COP: defined finance. And who does what? Who pays what? You cannot overburden people already burdened with loans and add that to them. But for you to be able to have that ambitious NDC and talk about loss and damage, we have to be very clear as to who does the paying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So yes, now I'm very much the very last thing between everybody here and dinner. So I'll be very brief. I hope I'll keep my promise. I'll do my best. So on that point, to conclude, first and foremost, I want to thank all of you for being here with us, whether it is in person or online. Thank you for your dedication to the cause. You care, and we care that you can. We hope that you care that we can. Thank you as well to the technical team that is also here. Thank you very much. Thank you to the gracious and generous host, the beautiful nation of Azerbaijan, for hosting us at this COP. Thank you, of course, to everybody that worked hard to make this event a success. Of course, we saw some of them here at the podium earlier during the presentation of partners as well, institutions that partnered with us here, a very amazing and inspirational co-chairs throughout the whole side event. Very thankful for the engagement, all the speakers, all the people that worked. Also, I see Maeve sitting there, but she didn't come in the front, but she's also part of the team that worked, and I wanted to acknowledge that in addition to the amazing three, the magical three that came earlier. So as a very last point I wanted to share with you, as I realized that my football analogy was getting some traction, so I'll also end on a football quote. And that football quote is also, as you'll see, as it is from a Brazilian footballer. It is connected to how much Alessandra connected to the football analogy, but also as we are all very much dedicated to working hard to making sure that this COP here is a success. And this is the focus of our work here. Simultaneously, and after that, of course, we also need to work towards COP30. That will be in Brazil. Very important COP also, just as this one is important. In between now and then, we'll have NDC 3.0, as some are calling them. And in that spirit, I wanted to share with you a quote from Pelé, one of the greatest football players of all time. And the quote goes as follows: "Success is no accident. It is hard work, perseverance, learning, studying, sacrifice, and most of all, love of what you are doing." And I think all of us very much love what we are doing. We love the planet, we love people, and we love making sure that the planet and the people are in a better shape after the work that we do than before. And I think that is a good quote to keep in mind as all of us are engaging in different capacities in NDC 3.0. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.